Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm your host, Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time with me today. Had a whole episode recorded, ready to go, and then the events of yesterday happened, and so I feel like we got to talk about that. In case you're not aware, in case you're hiding under a rock somewhere, the political activist Charlie Kirk was assassinated yesterday in Utah, doing what he does all the time, going to college campuses and having open debate with people. And I call it an assassination because, I mean, it is. We don't know anything. The shooter's not been captured. We don't know his motivations. But I don't think this was over a gambling debt. Just like, I think it's safe to say that that's not what this is about. And I think the only reason you take a rifle 200 yards away and shoot one shot and kill a person, it's not normally, especially someone that's a political activist. I think it's fair to call this an assassination. I don't think to call it a killing or a murder is enough. It's a political assassination for someone doing nothing other than exercising their rights to speak on college campuses about their opinions. And I don't know, I just feel like I need to talk about it because there's a lot I have to say. Some quick details, just because I think it's worth getting them out of the way. This happened at about noon, 12:10 p.m. local time in Utah Valley University, which is like 40 miles south of Salt Lake City. It's a pretty small town. I mean, like 100,000 people there, several colleges. And in the wake of not having a lot of information that we're getting, there's all sorts of speculation and there's all sorts of, second guessing of like the security at the event. I actually went to the same kind of Charlie Kirk thing in the spring at Oklahoma State University, and I'm seeing things that are like, oh, there wasn't enough security for an event that has 3,000 people. Well, I mean, it's outside, and what do you expect to happen in this case? I mean, they've got 6 officers there. Charlie Kirk has a private security team that's there. It's very hard to, it's not the president of the United States. And we saw what the Secret Service did with Donald Trump. I mean, he almost got assassinated twice. So, it's very hard to stop a single person that's willing to fire around from 200 yards away. Like I said, you can protect him with a barrier for like someone getting up there with a knife or someone having a weapon in the crowd. There were undercover officers in the crowd too. And, I don't know. I think to blame this on the university security or the law enforcement or his security, I just think it's kind of at this point pretty wild to try to blame those people. I don't know what else you would expect them to do. He does these kind of college events all the time. And frankly, if I'm being honest about that, my experience at Oklahoma State, the problem I had was they didn't bring big enough speakers. You couldn't hear. There was 1,000 people there or more or something, and you couldn't hear at the back. Like you could hear maybe if you were 15 feet in front of them, but that was it. So that was my complaint at that event, was this wasn't very well planned. They don't have a big enough speaker set to hear people. I've made my views on Charlie Kirk as his opinions known on the show. I did not agree with Charlie Kirk on a lot of things. I don't agree with a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of his opinions, and sort of he certainly was a huge figure in getting young men specifically to vote for Donald Trump. And I'm just not sold on the MAGA thing. I'm not sold on the lack of conservatism in the actual, policies of Donald Trump. And I disagree with him. And that's partially why I went to OSU. I was going to be one of the people that's prove me wrong. And it was just too hard. It was a logistical kind of a mess. It was too crowded up there. I tried to get up there with some of his staff, but it didn't work out. So I just did sort of man on the street stuff with some people in the back. And, so I didn't even really get to hear what he was saying for the most part, because again, the speakers weren't loud enough. But I disagree with him a lot. However, I think I've been very, very consistent about saying that political violence is bad no matter what. I very much disagree with Charlie Kirk. I think that I don't like a lot of his opinions. I think he's wrong about a lot of stuff. And it doesn't matter. You can't shoot someone that you disagree with. That's not how we do things in this country. So anyway, we've got this guy, the FBI is confusing because I went to church last night. I was playing, and so the last thing I had seen was Kash Patel had tweeted or X'd or whatever we call it now that they had the subject in custody. That was the last thing I heard. I was like, well, good, they caught the guy. I'm glad. And it was like 3 hours later, my wife was like, yeah, and they still haven't caught the guy. I was like, oh no, they did. Kash Patel tweeted out that they had him. He was like, no, I'm looking at the website right now, and it says suspect is still at large. And so it turns out they had a person of interest, but they let them go after determining that that person of interest was not the shooter. So, my concern right now, just law enforcement logistics, is that I'm worried that they might not catch this guy. They do have his rifle. They found it in the wooded area. They know some of his activity. He showed up at like 11:53 and took the shot at 12:10. So that's a very short amount of time that he's even on campus. Apparently he's younger, looks college aged and blended in well, and basically went straight up the stairs. So they've got video of this guy going up the stairs, but I think he's got a hoodie on or something. We've not seen any of these images yet. And goes to the roof, fires the shot, bails off the roof, and runs into a nearby neighborhood. And that's where they found his rifle in an area. They have a palm print, some sort of forearm print, some footprints. That's what they're analyzing. Obviously, law enforcement doesn't have to share everything with us. But my concern is that I watch a lot of Dateline with my wife, and I will not call it a guilty pleasure because there is no guilt in loving Keith Morrison. He's the GOAT. He's the best ever. I would like that voice to, I don't know if you've ever side tangent. There are podcasts where he reads like The Night Before Christmas and things like that. It's fantastic with the kids. Anyway, side note. My theory on if you want to get away with murder in the United States is do it in a smaller town where the police force is not used to having to deal with this kind of thing. And the town, Orrin, Utah, I believe is where this is at. That town in Utah has, I was looking up some of the crime stats, and, they might have like one murder a year. And so you've got a police force of, I think it's like 110 police officers in the city. Like I said, it's fewer than 100,000 people. It's like a 91,000 person city that's not used to a lot of violent crime kind of things, especially an assassination of this sort. And my concern is that snipers specifically, when you have a sniper, is that it's kind of law enforcement's worst case scenario, at least from the things I've read and the interviews I've seen, in that you've got like a lone wolf situation, but someone that's more high skilled than someone that's going to say, take a knife and start stabbing people in a Walmart like we saw in Michigan over the summer. And so snipers are scary. I don't know if anyone is listening that remembers like the DC sniper situation that was happening. I think that was 2002, 2003, something like that. And, it's scary. Like people were paralyzed with fear because this sniper was just going around killing random people from a distance. And it's just really hard to stop that. And specifically when you've got a situation like this, where it's probably a lone wolf situation and clearly pretty well planned out based on the details we know, as far as shows up, is sort of disguised, has a bolt action rifle that he leaves behind, in the ditches in the wood. He had some sort of escape route plan, obviously. And there's a degree of planning that went into this, obviously. I don't think we're going to be dealing with someone that has a severe mental illness like we did with even Donald Trump's near assassination last summer, where I think that guy was a little bit more all over the place, and really it worked out well, but only because the Secret Service did such a bad job at preventing him from getting on the roof in the first place to even be able to take the shot. But it wasn't especially well planned. He was kind of like scoping it out with a drone and sort of the day of, and it seemed like more of a crime of opportunity in that situation. Of course, we don't know because he was killed by the Secret Service at the time. So, like a sniper situation is scary. And if this guy planned well, I'm worried that the local law enforcement being in charge of those first really crucial minutes of being able to figure out where this guy went, like that's when you need to solve a crime. The popular thing is like, if you don't solve have a suspect in 48 hours after a murder, it gets like the chances of a prosecution just go way, way down, or even an arrest. And I think that's the case here, although obviously it's going to have the focus of the FBI and, state law enforcement and things in Utah. But my concern is that first hour might have been really crucial. And within those first couple of hours, we had Kash Patel tweeting that they had the guy. Well, what if that made all the law enforcement go, okay, we got the guy, we're good? I mean, I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying that's why the FBI should not be announcing things like that when they're not for sure they have. The tweet should have said, we have a person of interest in custody, but, we're not sure this is the guy yet, if you're going to tweet anything. So my concern is that the combination of the FBI being ran by Kash Patel and being in general shambles right now, the FBI is now hiring people with, they're lowering the training threshold. They're lowering the requirements. Like, you don't need a college degree anymore. Now, I don't necessarily know if that's a good or bad thing necessarily. I'm just saying they're lowering the standards because they don't have people. They don't have enough agents. They don't have enough people applying to be agents. And my concern is that combination of the FBI being not maybe as good of a law enforcement agency as they were in the past, with a small town local law enforcement that doesn't really never ever have to deal with even murders, much less political assassinations, is that this guy had plenty of lead time to get out of the way. And if they don't have some sort of biometric, like clear picture of his face that they can run into things, or cell phone data or something that they're going to be able to use, my concern is that this guy gets away with it. And that makes this even scarier, because a political assassination would be scary, period. That would be terrifying. But a political assassination where we don't know who did it and we don't know why they did it is even worse. I just think that's sort of the logistic stuff that I'm concerned about right now. But getting into the why this happened, how it happened, I was talking to a friend last night and I said, I'm shocked in the sense that it's obviously a shocking thing. I did not watch the video. Do have friends that have, and they suggested that no one does. I mean, these videos are everywhere on the internet, and I can only think of this guy's Charlie Kirk is 31 years old. He's married. He has young kids. His young kids are going to grow up without a dad, and they're going to. There's no way they're not going to come across that video of their dad being murdered, and it's just, I can't imagine. I really can't imagine. And in the immediate aftermath of this happening, I can tell you why this happened. Is because in the immediate aftermath of it happening, I saw people celebrating it. And these are people I know. These aren't necessarily close friends. These are people I maybe went to school with. I'm friends on Facebook. I'm no longer friends with them on Facebook because they posted things like, no one mourns the wicked. And gosh, it's like, there are lots of people I disagree with. I mean, I think that I've carved out a unique niche of, I piss off everyone because I don't like today's Republican Party. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff they say. I certainly don't like a lot of the things the Democrats do. And I'm picking on everyone. And so it doesn't make a lot of friends. People like to just be told their team is the right team and the other team is bad. And that's really the problem, is that we've turned everything into tribal. Everything is tribal now. Everything is this, we need a common enemy. And the rhetoric from the people that we elect and the people that we pay attention to on social media and in just media in general are so often using extreme language to describe the people that disagree with them. And this is on both sides, by the way. I'm not going to come out here and blame the radical left for this assassination because we don't know anything about the shooter yet. We don't have the guy. He might be a right-winger. We see this happens every time, is that before we know anything, we assume everything. And so everyone's just assuming this is a far left guy. And you know what? It's not an unfair assumption because he assassinated a guy on the right. So we don't generally see a lot of friendly fire in these kind of situations. I also doubt, because of the amount of, I think what is clearly some planning and some skill, that I, again, doubt that this guy is severely mentally ill, like some of the other potential assassinations that have happened. But look at the pattern, guys. This is not a new thing. What I told my friend last night is I'm honestly shocked this is the first time someone's died. We're fortunate that this hasn't happened before, but now it feels more real. because it felt like Donald Trump's assassination attempts, of which there were two, and I feel like those were in the news for about a month, and then we just kind of never talked about them, other than now I'm arguing with people that, a lot of people that are to the left of me think that it was a false flag operation, that this was all a planned thing, Trump's near assassination in Butler, Pennsylvania, which I just frankly think there's no evidence that that's the case. And I think that's a way to cope with not wanting to deal with that people are violent and that political violence is a real problem. But look, it's not just Trump. Going back over the last 10 years or so, we have the congressional baseball field shooting where Steve Scalise gets hit. The shooter was actively targeting Republicans in that situation. We have the crazy guy that breaks into Nancy Pelosi's house and attacks her husband with a hammer. We obviously was trying to get Nancy Pelosi too. We have the guy that shows up at Brett Kavanaugh's house to try to kill him. We have a guy that firebombed Governor Josh Shapiro's house in Pennsylvania on Passover while he and his family are inside the house. I mean, the goal would have been he said, the suspect, when they arrested him, said, yeah, if he would have came across Josh Shapiro, he would have hurt him. There's that. There's Donald Trump's 2 assassination attempts. We have, let's see, what other ones are there? There's so many. I mean, I'm going to count the United Healthcare CEO. I'm going to call that an assassination. So I'd say, I guess Charlie Kirk's not really the first, but Charlie Kirk's the first one where we knew that person's name before it happened. But that was a political assassination. That was because of the company he worked at and the industry he was in, and it was to make a political point. And so that's a political assassination in my view. So this is happening over and over again. We have the January 6th. I mean, we have a bunch of rioters at the Capitol. They're trying to break into the Capitol and hurt people. They're physically, violently attacking police officers, sometimes with their Blue Lives Matter flags, which is so funny. And then, with the express intent of hang Mike Pence and we're going to attack people. And this was a real violent thing that happened at the Capitol. And I'm not saying everyone that was at the Capitol that day was violent, but there were violent people there. And that was a violent attempt at stealing an election, frankly. And so that's violence. That's political violence. There was certainly political violence during the Black Lives Matter stuff. Those were more group dynamic kind of riot situations. But as far as assassination attempts, I'm forgetting some. I'm confident that I am. These are things that continue to happen. And what I've noticed is that every single one of those instances, there are people that are not even, you don't have to get into the depths of Twitter to find, some sort of Twitter troll that's doing it. Like I said, I found people that I know and I went to school with and I was still friends with on Facebook that are saying things like no one warns the wicked. And you just go like, dude, this guy's a father to 2 young children. He's a husband. He's a son. He's all these things. And all you see is that he voted for Trump and supports Trump, and therefore he's wicked. Now, again, I disagree with Charlie Kirk on a lot of things. I don't like a lot of his style. I don't agree with a lot of things. And I think that you can even be a bad person. I'm not saying he is or was. I'm saying that none of it justifies any of it. Like, I don't like Donald Trump. It does not justify someone trying to assassinate him. That is not how we solve political differences in the United States. And yet, every time one of these things happen, I see defenses from the side that feels like they need to be defensive about it. And no one really ever owns up to their side being the problem. No one ever owns up to their rhetoric being the problem. Even Donald Trump does a recorded message yesterday about this. And Charlie Kirk was really pretty close to the Trump administration. I think this has really rattled the White House. I really hope that they don't use it as some sort of pretext to do something more authoritarian than they've already done. But, even in that, he only cited the Republicans that had been targeted for assassinations. He didn't talk about Nancy Pelosi being targeted. He didn't talk about Josh Shapiro being targeted. He didn't talk about any Democrats that were targeted by people. Now, the weird thing there is that it's not always a right-left thing. I don't think right-left is the right way to think about this thing. But either way, it's just interesting to me that Donald Trump doesn't mention Gabby Gifford was shot in. Again, that was a crazy person kind of situation. But the point is, sometimes they're crazy people and sometimes they're not. And we have to say, no, none of it's okay, no matter what. And I'm very concerned that this is going to escalate things and not de-escalate things. I don't know why I'm so concerned about it, because it doesn't, Charlie Kirk is certainly not as, I think there's probably a lot of people that don't know who he is, and that's fine. Obviously, everyone knows who Donald Trump is. That was more widespread of a thing. But I think because we just kept getting off with, well, but they didn't die, so it's not a big deal. And then we turn into conspiracy theories about, it wasn't even a real thing that happened. And I think that's how we cope with it. I think we say, oh, well, that person was crazy. Or we say, well, that doesn't really represent the left. And yet we're forgetting that crazy people sometimes are influenced by the culture around them. And Donald Trump every day gets on in front of microphones and cameras and calls people radical left lunatics and that they're trying to destroy the country. And he uses language that says that he said it over and over again. The greatest threat to America is the progressive left and Democrats. It's not Russia. It's not China. It's not Iran. It's not any sort of external threat. It's not, some sort of policy that he wants to change. It's like a group of people that are the bad guys, and they are evil, and their intention is to destroy America. And guess what? The left is doing the exact same thing all the time. They're constantly telling us how, if you elect Trump, you'll never have another election again. He's going to destroy American democracy. And you can be fair in the warnings of saying, hey, he has authoritarian tendencies, but no one ever just leaves it at like, here's the things that concern me about Donald Trump. He doesn't really care about the Constitution. He does have authoritarian tendencies. They go straight to, he's Hitler and he's trying to bring back fascism. And what do you think people are going to do when you tell them over and over again that, okay, first of all, both sides are saying your vote doesn't matter anymore, because when they lose elections, they say it was stolen from them. So you're telling people that their civic responsibility of voting doesn't matter anymore because if we lose, it's because someone rigged it and it was stolen by the other team. And so what do you think people are going to go to if they don't think voting is the way that they can change the country? And they certainly don't trust the institutions anymore. We've had a widespread loss of faith in institutions. There's a populist movement going on which doesn't trust any elite people, even though the elite people are pretending to not be elite. It absolutely cracks me up that any sitting U.S. senator would rail on the elites when it's like, you are one of 100 people in the country that are in that body. I mean, that is the definition of being elite. And so we've got all this going on. And what do you think people are going to do? It doesn't take very many people to convince that, I think the best way to do this would be, I have to assassinate someone. That's the only way to get rid of that person. That's the only way to stop the threat, is to kill that person. And I think until we really have a moment where someone in political leadership steps up and says, I have contributed to this, and here's how I did it, and I'm going to stop. Donald Trump, you would think, after surviving a near-death experience. I mean, he got, grazed by a bullet. He turned his head is the only reason Donald Trump is alive right now. I would hope that if I had that near-a-death experience that it would change me for the better, and I don't see that it has changed Donald Trump at all. He still spews he talks about Democrats the exact same way he always has. And I don't see that assassination attempt changed anything about the way the left talks about Donald Trump or people on the right. To celebrate someone's death because they disagree with you is wrong. You are a bad person if you do that, in my opinion. And I don't have anything to add to it other than that. Like, you're a bad person if your first instinct when you hear that someone has been shot that is from the opposite team of you is good. Like, I'm glad someone did something. Your hands are dirty. You're complicit in this. If you cheer it on, if you're on the internet, and I know, like I said, the internet's not real world. Social media is not the real world. I think people say things behind keyboards that they would never say to someone in person. But to go through the process of typing something out like that and then posting it and celebrating someone's death, that, again, this is not Hitler we're talking about. I know that everyone calls every Republican Hitler, and every Republican is racist, and everyone, that's the common broad stroke kind of thing. But that's just like, again, how do you solve that problem? If you're cheering on. And this happened with the United Healthcare CEO. This happened with Donald Trump. There were all sorts of people going, I wish he was a better shooter. There are people, I'm sure, saying the same thing now. Oh, they wish this guy would have been in Butler instead. I'm not paying attention to social media, by the way. It's just not worth it for the most part. But I know this stuff is going on, and it's not just on social media. There have been, MSNBC had to apologize because their person was on there saying, like, well, maybe he's deserved this. He did not. Charlie Kirk did not deserve to be assassinated and murdered. Like, in front of a group of people. It's incredibly shocking. It's I don't know where we go from here. And my concern is that it will just continue to escalate because I've seen no de-escalation of this over the past decade. It just seems like it keeps getting worse, and we keep having more situations where someone gets closer, or, like I said, I think we've been really fortunate that this hasn't happened more often. And I just don't have a lot of hope that we're going to get our act together and that Donald Trump's going to start behaving better. If, like I said, if the near-death experience did not change the way he talked about his political rivals, then I don't think anything will. I don't think Charlie Kirk's death will. And I've just seen that there's no lessons learned in any of this stuff. And here's the really concerning part. I don't think this is a fringe thing where there's just a few people that have gone this way. FIRE, which is the organization that actually cares about free speech, as opposed to the ACLU, which is just a progressive organization now. They don't actually care about free speech, but FIRE actually does. And they defend free speech everywhere. It's a great organization. I follow their newsletter. It's great. They also release this thing every year, specifically about college campuses, where they rank colleges on their free speech. And no surprise, at the bottom of the list is like Columbia University. Very lack of free speech. And obviously, Charlie Kirk goes to universities and he speaks to university students. There are always protests. There are always people that say they don't want him there. I almost exclusively, when I went to the OSU one, talked to people that were there that were not Republicans, were not conservative, and were kind of there. But they were there to hear what he's had to say. And I commend that. I think it's good for people to go and listen to speech that they don't agree with. And FIRE specifically is an organization that says, we want people to be exposed to speech that they don't like. And so they fight for college speakers that aren't allowed to come on and all these sort of things. And they write about it and they defend them with lawyers. And it's a great organization. But they do a survey every year where they ask people, one of the questions is, when do you think violence is appropriate to stop free speech? And from 2021, that number was 21% of respondents said to some degree, they believed that sometimes it was okay to use violence. And that is now up to, I think, 34%. So this is just college-age students. They survey 70,000 students, and 2% of them said that it's okay. It's always okay to use violence to stop speech that you disagree with. I can't remember the exact percentage the other was, but they added up to, basically it was like, yeah, it's always okay. Sometimes it's okay. Rarely is it okay. But if you combine rarely, sometimes, and always, it was like 34% of college students, and that's up from 21% in 2021. So the youngest adults in our midst in this country are increasing in numbers, believing that it's okay to use violence to stop speech that you disagree with. And that is what's concerning to me, is that this is not a fringe thing. That's a 50% increase. Now, I know that only 2% said it's always okay. And, I assume that there's always going to be 2% that feel that way. But a lot of them don't think that we should really have free speech, that it's not, there's all these surveys where it's like, is it okay to have free speech if it hurts people's feelings? Are words violence? And there's all this survey data that shows that people's opinion about free speech is changing. And that concerns me because I think that is the pillar. There's a reason it's the First Amendment. I think that without freedom of the press, without freedom of religion, without freedom of speech, and being able to do what I'm doing right now, is call out politicians and people that I disagree with. I think without that, this country does not exist in the same way that it has for almost 250 years. What's going on in the UK and other European countries, there's a famous story just in the last couple of weeks where a a guy was arrested when he arrived at Heathrow for a tweet that he tweeted about transgenderism. You can be arrested in England for writing something that they say is hate speech. And his hate speech, by the way, is, I can't even remember what the tweet was, but it was something that you absolutely get to do in America, and you don't have the police show up. So he was arrested for that. This is not hard to see where we're going. And I think we just take free speech for granted in this country because we've had it for so long, and it is truly rare. We're the only country that has it. And those rights are eroding to some degree, sometimes by law and sometimes not. I do not agree with the Supreme Court in saying that the Biden administration did not, break free speech laws by, strong arming Facebook into taking certain posts down during COVID. I do not. I don't really buy the argument there. I mean, whatever. The Supreme Court, the smart people, they know the law, but there's a real fine line between, okay, was it coercion? Or was it, I scratch your back, you scratch mine? Or was it like, hey, it's not really a threat, but you should do this? Or things are, there's all these tricky ways that they get around it. And frankly, the letter of the law will not protect us. The First Amendment will not protect us. Laws will not protect us if the spirit of that law is not also believed in by Americans. So if we're like, well, by the letter of the law, the White House didn't threaten them. There's no email thread with a specific threat that said they're going to do X if you don't take down Y post. So the government didn't really restrict this free speech. Facebook did, and it's totally within their rights because they're a private company. But if we don't have a culture of protecting that, even at the private level, like Facebook is a private company, they can take down any post they want to. But are we better off as a country to have a Facebook that says, you know what, but as long as it's not actually threatening in some sort of way, if someone's just expressing their opinion, we're not going to take that down because we believe in free speech. And even though we don't have to follow that, we're not the government restricting free speech. And we just don't have that culture anymore. The left is very much into saying what we can and can't say, which words and how you got to say stuff. And you can't have that opinion. Like I said, the whole rest of the world is arresting people for tweets and stuff, including, like I said, England. This is not Iran that this is happening. This is England, where a guy got arrested for a tweet. And I'm worried that if 34% or beyond that, they're saying it's okay to use violence to stop speech that you don't like. I just worry about where we're going. And this has affected me more than I thought it would, I think, because I am scared of the escalation here. I am concerned that we might not find this guy. I'm concerned that, of course, I should probably check the news while I'm recording this just to see if he has been found. But so far, nothing. We do not have, we don't have motivation. We don't know who this person is. And I think that makes us potentially live in fear. And fear is also a bad thing because then we might let, Trump has used violence against people he likes as excuses for authoritarian sort of things. The whole thing that happens in DC is because a Doge staffer, whose nickname is unfortunately Big Balls for whatever reason, gets attacked. And that was the thing. Now, there have been carjackings going on in DC for a long time. It's a huge problem. But that was the catalyst. It was a friend of Trump. And almost Trump thinks of everything as who are my friends and who are my enemies. And your friends get everything and your enemies get nothing. And your enemies are actually worse than nothing. They get punished and they get sought out. And I see this as a potential of it being another excuse to say, well, now what we're going to do, whatever. I can't even dream of the things that we could do about this. So, praying for law enforcement. I hope they find the guy. I think that he did have some apparently messages scrawled on the rifle and ammo, and we don't know what those are yet. So we'll see. I'm hopefully by the time you're listening to this, they've caught him, and maybe I'm worried about it for no reason. But I just think that we've got to really look ourselves in the mirror and say, like, and I say us, I don't think that most individuals in America are the big problem here, although we could demand more from the people that lead us. And we're just not. Like, we're all in on, I don't see a lot of pushback to when Donald Trump calls the greatest threat to American democracy the left, Democrats, and it's not anyone else. And he calls them enemies all the time, and enemies of the state. He calls the press the enemies of the state. He calls all these people enemies. And you can't say that over and over again without you're implementing, you're implying that you're in a war. Because I mean, enemies generally, that's the primary context of the word enemy. And I just think it's dangerous. And I think that you don't have to convince that many people to be violent. Look at, again, January 6th is a great example. You can't use that kind of rhetoric and then not expect there to be some sort of violent outcome. And again, I'm probably harping on the right a lot when maybe that sounds unfair because it was someone on the right. But again, that's my side. And so, of course, I'm going to call out when Democrats do it too. And I've been consistent about that. The United Healthcare CEO was especially appalling how many people were cheering that on and saying, yeah, let's get more of this. And it even happened with an accidental assassination of that New York shooter that was trying to get the NFL office, and he ends up at BlackRock, I think, and murders a woman there, and people were celebrating it. Again, she's a mom, she's a wife, and she works at a company that some people have decided they don't like, and they think that company is evil. Again, that's what we use all the time. We use the word evil to describe people who disagree with us. And instead, we should reserve that for people that murder people who, disagree with them. That's evil. The shooter that shot up a Catholic mass during school, targeting children, that's evil. Your opinion about how we fix the problems in America doesn't make you good or evil. I think we give way too much credit to people's intentions. Not credit, that's not the right way to say it. We put too much stock in when we disagree with people, we often think that their motivations are wrong. And you hear that in the way Donald Trump talks about Democrats wanting to destroy the country. And Democrats say the same thing about Donald Trump. They say he wants to destroy the country. He wants to be a fascist dictator. He wants to get rid of all minorities. He's racist. He's sexist. Whatever. You hear those accusations. And I think for the most part, people do have the best of intentions. I think that those on the right and the left generally are like, I do think this is the way to solve this problem. Gun violence is a great example of this. And that's actually what the entire episode was about, oddly enough, that I'm scrapping now, is you have to go into this debate knowing that on something like gun violence, knowing that I think everyone wants there to be less violence. I think that's the goal. I don't think that people, for example, that want to get rid of the Second Amendment, I don't think it's because they want a tyrannical government. I don't think that they are going that far down the road. I think they literally just want people to not die from gunshots. That's it. That's their motivation. And then the people on the right, same thing. Immediately after that school shooting in Minnesota, all the commentary, I was unfortunately in the comment section of the New York Times, and a lot of the comments were like, because the article was about like, how do you talk to your kids about this kind of thing? And some of the comments were like, you tell your kids that this happens because of Republicans, because Republicans want kids to die. And I just think, no, no one wants kids to die. I don't know. I've never met a single person that wants kids to be murdered. I've never met that person. I mean, other than I've never met any of these shooters, obviously, maybe they're notwithstanding, but I've never actually met a person that was like, yeah, I think we should be murdering kids. I don't think we need as many of them. I haven't met that person. I would probably not get along very well with that person, but that's what people ascribe. If you are pro Second Amendment, or you don't think we should just confiscate all guns or whatever, or take people's guns away without any sort of adjudication. And I think, we have different reasoning. There are people on the right that think guns save lives. And Charlie Kirk is one of those people. And there's some of that going on in commentary that like, well, how ironic that here's this guy that says part of the sort of the dirty part of having the Second Amendment is that, yeah, some people are going to die by gunshots that wouldn't otherwise, but that's worth it in the grand scheme of protecting us from a tyrannical government. That's essentially his opinion. And they're taking that and saying like, well, I'm glad he got shot as great. He can be one of those people. And again, it's assigning a motivation to him to saying like that his goal was for more people to be murdered. And I just think that's crazy. That's not people's motivation. And so we got to do a better job at not ascribing ill intent to people's political opinions or their policy solutions. And that starts at the very top, though. That would trickle down. If Donald Trump said, hey, we're not doing this anymore. I'm not going to talk about the left that way. I'm going to call them out when I think they have bad ideas. But I'm not going to personally attack them. I'm not going to call them evil. I'm not going to say they're the greatest threat to democracy. I'm going to stop doing that. If Donald Trump did that, it would trickle down to the whole of the Republican Party because he has a complete stranglehold on the party right now. And every little MAGA person beneath him, all of his staff and the Republican Party and people in Congress, it would flow down from there. He could make that decision right now. And frankly, so could Democrats that are in power. Now, I don't know who they are. I don't know who the leader of the Democratic Party is right now. But if Kamala Harris or Joe Biden came out and said, you know what, I have done this, and I called Donald Trump a fascist, and I said that, Joe Biden could come out. I mean, if he even has the wherewithal to be able to do this. If Joe Biden came out and said, you know what, I said if they elected Mitt Romney, I told a group of black people that he'll put you back in chains. And that was extreme and not right. And I slandered a man and made people think that, their lives were in danger if this guy got elected. And then what do you expect those people to do? I would love to see from the top down, people own their own rhetoric. And, I don't have a lot of hope that that's going to happen again, because if a near assassination didn't change Donald Trump's ways, then I don't think someone else getting assassinated is going to. I think he's going to act angrily. And we've not seen he's already blaming this on the left. And we don't even know who the shooter is. We don't know. It could be a Russian for all we know. We have no idea. And I just don't see us turning down this dial until our leaders do, because I can sit here on my little podcast and talk about it, but I don't have the influence that Donald Trump does. And so I don't have the influence that Hakeem Jeffries or Nancy Pelosi or AOC or Bernie Sanders or pick any Republican that you want to. I mean, I don't have the influence that they do. And, I would think Steve Scalise would be one of these people that would be out there and be like, I was a victim of this. I got shot playing baseball, Republicans versus Democrats. And that's not okay that we have this thing. Now, they always like to blame the other side. Again, they never take the blame themselves. And the left is guilty of this too. I know I'm harping on Donald Trump, again, because it's my side, and so I'm going to call it my side. But the Brett Kavanaugh attack specifically is not something that we've dealt with enough, in my opinion. He was his character was assassinated. I think that's a totally fair assessment of what happened during his confirmation trials or hearings, not trials. His confirmation hearing. His character was assassinated, and the left wanted you to believe that this was the worst person, that he was evil. Again, that this is a bad person. Not that we disagree with his judgment, that we think he's a bad person. And then, it's just no one apologizes or says anything about when a guy tries to show up and murder him at his house. It's just kind of quiet about it. I literally talked to friends of mine who are Democrats, who are wonderful people. And I would not put them on the side of things where they're crazy progressive or anything like that. They had never heard that happened. And these are people that pay some attention in the news, but I think a Supreme Court justice nearly being assassinated should make a bigger ripple. I think that's the problem, though, is that it's always been near assassination. So Brett Kavanaugh didn't die. Nancy Pelosi didn't die. Her husband didn't die. Steve Scalise didn't die. No one ended up dying on January 6th other than one protester, or I'd say protester, rioter. I mean, again, and she's been made a martyr. Of course, we talk all about that, but they don't talk about the fact that those people were trying to violently attacking police officers, and they wanted to hurt people inside but we don't talk about that part. We just talk about Ashley Babbitt because she got killed by police officers inside the Capitol. And I think all these near assassinations have made us kind of numb to, well, it's going to be fine. And it's just not. I don't think we can live in that world anymore. I think we've been flirting with it too much anyway. So not an especially hopeful version of this this podcast. So, I don't know where to go from this. I just think that, I don't know. I'm not particularly encouraged by anything going on, to a degree that I'm just concerned that this is going to escalate. I think that I think you'll see Democrats be targeted. I think you'll see Republicans. I think now that this is spreading out to not just, we used to only think of assassinations as you had to be a politician to be assassinated in some sort of way. Although there have been exceptions to that. I would say, Martin Luther King Jr., I would say Malcolm X, I would say there certainly have been political assassinations that were not politicians. And I think we're creeping into that. Like I said, we've got a United Healthcare CEO. We've got CEOs changing their security because based on, I could be a target because someone doesn't like or thinks they have an idea that we're an evil company or whatever. And I think this is bad, especially as it trickles into Charlie Kirk's. This is just a political commentator. When it comes down to it, he was a political activist in the sense that he tried to get college students to be involved in conservative politics. And I'm going to give Charlie Kirk all the credit. He went out there and he talked to people and he debated people. Yeah. Now, my sort of critique of him was always, well, yeah, I mean, it's a little easier when you're like 31 and you're debating 18-year-olds. That's a pretty easy debate sometimes, but notwithstanding, he's at least out there. He's defending his views. He's it's in the moment. He doesn't have some speech written out. He's actually having to do this on the fly as people come up to the microphone. And I commend him for that. And he's just doing what I think we should all be doing to a degree, is talking with people that we disagree with. And we've just gotten in these little echo chambers where we don't ever hear another opinion. And so it is really easy to think of the other side as evil because we don't talk to them. We don't know any of them. We're secluding ourselves into red or blue states. And then within those little areas, we're living in communities where we don't have to ever bump up against something that we disagree with. And we're doing that with our friend groups. We're doing that with dating. Gen Z and Gen Alpha are basically not even, they won't even think about dating someone that has different political views than them. And, whatever, where's your list of things that matter? For me, I care about politics a lot. I'm a political junkie. My wife does not. It was just not something on the list of things that I required from a girlfriend or spouse. There's a lot of other things that are above politics. And as politics has sort of replaced religion in this country, it can't be that anymore because it's a religion. And we treat it like a religion with the good and the bad, or the good versus evil. And I just don't see how we're going to get out of this without a major sort of disaster that wakes us up or some sort of other common enemy. And it's interesting that I'm saying all this on the anniversary of September 11th, which, felt like that was a thing that could have done that. And I think it did for a brief moment. And then we were divisive about how we respond to it. And I'm doing a podcast interview later for someone else's show, and they had sent some of the questions in advance, and they asked, like, one of the questions, like, why do you think we're so divisive? When do you think that started? Like, what do you think started that? And it really got me thinking. I don't think I can pinpoint a specific date, but I do think there's something to be said about, we have World War II, we have the Cold War. Basically, there's 50 years there where we have a common external enemy. It's either, Japan, Germany, or Soviet Union in the Cold War. And in 1991, when that wall falls and the Soviet Union collapses, it's like, oh, well, who's our enemy now? And I think the 90s, because of the prosperity going on in the United States, and we didn't really have a hard time, like we were like very prosperous, things were going well. And I think that's where I'd say this kind of starts. And maybe that's naive of me because I know politics has always been dirty and stuff, and I grew up in the 90s, so I'm obviously got some sort of recency bias there. But, that is like the rise of talk radio. That's the rise of sort of it seemed like more, we've got the cable news stuff kind of raising. We've got the cable news shows like Crossfire and Hannity and Combs, and where they're sort of arguing, but like the point is we're fighting about everything and we're never really talking about the things we agree on together. Now, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I'm not on Team Jon Stewart, where I think that Crossfire is the reason for the downfall of America. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying it was a heightened, like we started paying attention to political stuff as entertainment of sorts because things were going well otherwise. And so it did become this sort of infotainment kind of thing. I feel like in the 90s, that's really where that started with the rise of Fox News and cable news in general and talk radio, conservative talk radio specifically, Rush Limbaugh. And I'm not blaming any of these people. I'm just saying I think it started a thing that then when September 11th happens and then the financial crisis and things aren't as good as they were economically or with people's jobs or families or drug addiction or whatever. And I think we sort of took that stuff that used to be infotainment of sorts and we've internalized it to a way that says, no, I think like that person's my enemy and they are evil. And I'm ascribing evil intent to their actions and evil intent to their policies and evil intent to their opinions. And I think it's just ramped up and up and up and up. And Donald Trump was not the cause of this. I think he was more of a result of a lot of the distrust of parties and Democrats and elite or federal government or whatever it was. And then Donald Trump just turned up the dial on it. And so I feel like we've just been, it's like if that was ramping up like this for a while, or sorry, I guess if you're watching this, it'd be like this. If it was ramping like this, it was doing that for decades. And then Donald Trump getting elected just made it shoot up. And just like I said, look at I would need to research it. I don't think there were this many political assassination attempts in the 2000s or the 2010s. It's really ramped up in the last 8 years or so that I can think about. And I think that there's a reason for that. And we've really got to figure this out because, you know, if this escalates and we start seeing political assassinations all the time and we start seeing people accept that as normal, I'm very concerned about where this country goes because it's even made me think like, you know, I've got a political podcast. Again, Charlie Kirk is the most famous, maybe conservative activist there was. But it does make you think. It's like, well, who's going to be brave enough to go out and speak their mind when the consequence might be that you get shot and killed? And I think that the consequences for that are even lower than that right now. A lot of times people are just afraid to, you know, be ostracized or to be made fun of or to lose their job or to be thought of differently or whatever. And so there's a lot of people, I think, in this country that are just keeping their mouths shut and they'd rather not say anything, even though they probably also think all this is crazy. I think you only have to look at the rise of independent voters to know that people are tired of it and people are checking out. I think something, I'm going to have to find the poll. It was some poll that said basically 65% of the country is just checked out. And they're like, I don't want to pay attention to politics because it's so corrosive and gross and doesn't, you know, it just brings me stress and I don't want to deal with it. And so they just totally check out. I don't think that's a great thing if 65% of the country says, I'm out, and they shut up and they don't say anything and they don't say what they think. And then we just leave the 35% that's much more fringy, much more far right or far left or more authoritarian or, you know, whatever. And my concern is that if we, the normal majority of this country, don't say something or do things about it, that we will just get crazier and crazier. Anyway, so obviously prayers with Charlie Kirk's family. I cannot imagine like life for those two kids and his wife. It's got to be so much different than like if you die of a heart attack or die in a car wreck. That's hard anyway. I've known people that have lost spouses at young ages with young kids, and I know it's not fun. Like, it's terrible. This seems even worse, though. I'm not trying to like pit one thing against the other. I just really can't imagine it. And I cannot imagine the sadness, and I cannot imagine what they're going through. And to then have to deal with the backlash of, you've got people calling your dad wicked. You got people saying he deserved it. You've got video of it on the internet. This cannot be who we are as a society, as a country. I'm very concerned about where we're going. So anyway, that's that for me. I'll catch you next time.